On paper, Jonathan Taylor and the Colts run game should be lights out, but is depth a concern? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. What up, y'all? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks of horseshoehuddle.com. And today we are continuing our positional reviews, previews, I guess you could say. We did quarterback yesterday. We are now on to running backs today, talking about the obvious star of the group, Jonathan Taylor, who might be fending for RB2 scraps between Trey Sermon, Tyler Goodson, and Evan Hall. And then we go to the bottom of the roster and a couple of actually pretty interesting guys in Zavier Scott and Trent Pennix and how they maybe fit into the fold as well. So, Zach, let's obviously go ahead and start with Taylor. So I did this very high-tech, mathematical, scientific table of his career stats here. Audio, sorry, but maybe check YouTube for a second or just pull up Pro Football Reference on your side. So it just goes to show here, he obviously had that major hiccup 2 years ago when he got injured. But if you look at last year, he is on the rise again, and it's very obvious when you look at that Week 18 game against the Texans when he exploded again for like 175 yards or whatever it was. But you could see the touchdowns per game and the yards per touch are both back up. I mean, besides the eyeball test, which is very clear that he's starting to look like himself again. It's good to see that. We had the 4 snaps and like 1 exchange, whatever it was, between Taylor and Anthony Richardson last year. And that was one of the most exciting parts of the Colts even drafting Richardson last year. But, you know, Taylor had the contract situation and the ankle all throughout last offseason. Richardson was fine, you know, getting acclimated as a rookie, did some nice things. But by the time he was taking off, Taylor got back, and then it just never met up, you know. Richardson got hurt pretty much right away. So both of them are healthy right now. Richardson back from his shoulder, you know, they're taking it, you know, they're fine tuning some things, but he's for all intents and purposes, he's back. So him and Taylor getting that chemistry together on, you know, option plays, just general handoffs, even, you know, dump offs in the backfield. How does Taylor want it? What velocity, what height range. So all those really fine details are already getting hammered out now, and those two aren't going to have to be playing catch up and learning each other on the run this year.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to make note of with Jonathan Taylor, and I'll go back to your graphic here, and I'll actually talk about the graphic a little bit for audio people. You know, with this, you see obviously that 2-year stretch to start his career, the 2020 and 2021, fantastic stretch, 3,500 total yards in 2 seasons, just one of the best players in all of football. I mean, a truly great running back. It was great offensive threat. But I do love, you know, with these last 2 years, only 21 games played. Don't love that, obviously, but we're talking about him having this down stretch of games in this down stretch of play where he's got 1,800 total yards over the last 2 years. So basically in 21 games played, which is a little bit over 1 season, he's got 1,800 total yards. And that's him struggling. That's him not being at his peak because those first 2 years were so fantastic. So getting Jonathan Taylor back to start this season and hopefully healthy, hopefully, you know, ready to go to start this year. I mean, it's going to be a massive, massive boost to this team. There's a big reason why the Colts were able to hammer out that deal and they didn't ultimately trade him last year is because of the potential that he adds to this offense. And, you know, there were a lot of times when he came back last year, it still didn't look perfectly right. Now, he was getting acclimated to an offense that he was only really seeing in the offseason. He wasn't really participating in because of his injury. He was working with a quarterback he wasn't used to working with. He was working with a run scheme that he wasn't super familiar with, you know, a lot more out of the gun and a lot more getting downhill from the gun rather than being under center. So it was a big adjustment for him. But I can't imagine a better scenario for all of us watching Jonathan Taylor than seeing that Week 18 game last year. That Week 18 game just eased so much inside me about Jonathan Taylor, because when you look at running backs, when that first injury happens, it feels like they just keep happening. Injury, and these guys just never get back to that dominant self that they once were. And we see it with running backs, man. When they hit that cliff, they tumble over it and they just keep falling downhill. And for Taylor, if this was what he was going to be before that Week 18 game last year, if that was what he was going to be the rest of his career, that's still fine. But it's not what he was. And that would have been just a very tragic thing to see, especially for Colts fans who are so used to seeing injuries derail really great players. But seeing that Week 18 game where the Colts were essentially in a playoff game, again, with their backup quarterback who was struggling to throw the ball that entire game, they were essentially in a playoff game. And Taylor was looking like the best offensive player on the planet that game. Like, he was unstoppable in that game. He looked fast. He looked strong. He was making guys miss. Even on obvious rundowns, he was making dudes miss and creating yardage. His touchdown run was vintage Jonathan Taylor. So we're riding sky high expectations, sky high optimism into this offseason when it comes to Taylor, and just excited to see what he can do in this offense.
Muted again, vintage me. One of the big things I'm looking at here with him is there is no Zach Moss this year. So you're looking at him being probably a dominant workhorse again, just dominating those backfield touches like we've seen before. Because even when he came back last year, there was a lot of mixing it up with Zach Moss. Eventually, it started to lean very heavily towards Taylor. But now you don't have anyone else on the roster that's even close to that. So his health is going to be paramount. I think we're both a little surprised there hasn't been anyone else added. I think the Colts tried to. In the offseason, there was rumor they had been talking about A.J. Dillon. They wanted Zach Moss back. After the draft, Chris Ballard was asked if, running back was a consideration, and it just never really materialized for them. Not that they wouldn't have done it, but I do imagine it's at some point they don't want Taylor to touch it 350, 375 times. I think they want someone to be able to take some of that pressure off of him, and ideally it not be Anthony Richardson for the most part.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think that ideally they want him, closer to like 300 touches rather than being, in the 400s or 500s like he was early in his career. But I do think it's going to be something. I think we're going to see the full steam ahead this year. I think there's going to be a median between us wanting to hold his touches back and other people wanting to push him to the limit. I do think it's going to be, this is the Jonathan Taylor show for the first time in 2-3 years, whatever it's been since 2021. This is going to be his show. They extended him. They're paying him big money to be out there, and they don't really have backup plans behind him. I think it's going to be a lot of Jonathan Taylor out there this season. And we're going to have to see him, really carry the tote this year and do what he can for this offense to be effective. But I did want to touch on the Anthony Richardson thing real quick. The impact of having him with Anthony Richardson is massive. Just what you can do to dictate what you want to do on offense. You can just dictate so much on opposing defenses. You can have just so many different forces pulling defenses apart and condensing them. We saw in the first Titans game when Zach Moss was out there. This wasn't even Jonathan Taylor. But when Zach Moss had the 56-yard touchdown run, we saw the impact of having Anthony Richardson on that play did for that touchdown, because Anthony Richardson did a read option. It might have been a triple option, but I think it was a read option play where he's holding that safety just because of the threat of his legs, which caused that crease for Zach Moss to hit the open seam up the middle for that long touchdown run. So when you project a whole season of Jonathan Taylor with that, where Taylor is much more explosive, much faster, much better at making guys miss than Zach Moss, it's easy to see the excitement and see the potential in this offense. So if Jonathan Taylor's healthy, if Anthony Richardson's healthy, and they can really just have these guys going at full speed all year, I mean, watch out opposing defense. Just watch it. It doesn't even, Richardson doesn't even need to run for 1,000 yards. Just the threat of him running will open up so much for Jonathan Taylor. And we talked about this last year, but now it's more a reality going into this year because there's nothing holding these two guys back. So seeing these guys on the field together in that running game, in the passing game too, it's going to be a fantastic thing to see for this offense.
Yeah, I totally agree, because you think of that and it seems like some big, huge thing, but it's literally as simple as freezing a linebacker or a safety for just like a quarter of a second. But that quarter of a second costs them the offensive player getting a step or two on them. So like, or just leverage or an angle. Like, it is so critical. And as long as Richardson is going to remain a dynamic, explosive running threat, which he hurt his shoulder, he didn't hurt his legs, I don't see why we don't pick up where we left off this time last year, saying that it's going to be a top 5 running team. Like, I think they have huge ability. And like you said, ideally, would they like to have Taylor reined in a little bit, or like not have to have a huge load? Probably. But if they're winning in the second half, we've seen that they will run the clock out. Like, Taylor probably will have a very, very, very large role in this offense, because they also don't want to make it the Anthony Richardson show either. They want him to play off of the run game. So I'm with you. I think it's going to be a super productive group. Fingers crossed, as long as everybody stays healthy. So coming up next, we mentioned there's not a lot of depth behind Taylor, and he's probably going to be the workhorse, but who physically is up next in line behind him? Buying tickets to events can be frustrating, especially if you aren't sure if the seats are any good, if you can't find last-minute tickets, or there's just no good deals in general. However, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Coming up here locally, we've got Pacers Celtics Eastern Conference Finals. The Fever are also getting their season started as well. The Colts coming up in September. The Indy 500 is right here. So there is, like I mentioned recently, concert season as well. So tons of reasons to get out and buy tickets to stuff, and there's really no better place than Gametime to do so. They've got the last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off of buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever scratches your itch. Flash deals. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Zone deals, which is pretty neat. Save even more when you choose a section, and then let Gametime choose the seats for you in that section. All-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout, because we've all been there. We think we're going to spend X amount, and then after all the convenience fees and all that, it's way, way more. And then they have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you found a better price in that section somewhere else. So again, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Zach, so there's 3 big names to keep an eye on behind Taylor. There's a leader in the clubhouse, but really I think there's 3 guys kind of fighting for the main RB2 spot. They're probably not going to keep many running backs, so one of these guys may be the odd man out and not even make the roster. But you're looking at Trey Sermon, Tyler Goodson, and Evan Hull. So Hull was really, really popular this time last year. I had just got done watching him at rookie minicamp, and it was him and Josh Downs dominating and looking great. And, you get into training camp, and Hull looks fine. He looks the part. He's not blowing people away. But then week 1 comes. He tears his meniscus and is out for the year. Kind of a similar story to Anthony Richardson. You never really saw what he could be. So Hull was thought to be someone who could compete for, snaps behind Zach Moss last year, but it just didn't come to fruition. You get Trey Sermon in there, you get Tyler Goodson in there, and then with continued issues with Jonathan Taylor, he had, I think it was a hand or wrist late in the year. He had an upper body thing, whatever it was. Had to miss some time, and particularly the Pittsburgh game. Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson had a huge performance. 17 carries for 88 yards, which was a 5.2 yard per carry average for Sermon in that game on only 43% of the snaps. Goodson had 13 touches for 79 yards, which is 6.1 average on only 28% snaps. And that game was the bulk of both of their production, but still for the season, Sermon averaged 4.6 a carry and Goodson 6.7 per carry. So in a very limited portion size behind two ball dominant guys in Taylor and Moss, those guys kind of answered the call, and they're going to have a really good offensive line to be behind. And as you mentioned, Anthony Richardson changes everything for any running back, really.
Yeah, and I think the guy to watch here in this group is obviously Trey Sermon. Trey Sermon was that next guy up whenever something happened with Zach Moss, or Zach Moss was getting a breather, or when Moss was out, when Taylor needed a breather, it was Sermon that was getting those next guy up type of carries. He was third on the team in carries last year, if you don't count quarterbacks getting in there. But Trey Sermon was that third running back last year, and it makes sense to project him as that RB2 going to this next season. Sermon also has experience with Shane Steichen. They overlapped in Philadelphia for a little bit. I believe it was 2 years there in Philly that they overlapped, but it might have only been the 1 year. So Sermon does have that experience with Steichen and the system more so than the other guys. He was a third back last year, and he kind of fits that RB2 mold that the Colts look for. They like those bigger running backs. They like those guys who can get downhill and fall forward for positive gains and keep an offense on track. So I think Trey Sermon's got all the opportunity in the world, and honestly, if I were this kid's agent, I would be telling him, look, you're never going to get a better opportunity than this. Like, this is going to be the best opportunity you're ever going to get in your NFL career. So it's on him to come out here in training camp and really solidify himself as that RB2. For Goodson and Hull, I think that these guys are both competing for that third down running back spot, or the pass catcher spot. The Colts have always had someone fill that role in the offense. Last year, when Jonathan Taylor came back from his injury, they kind of used Jonathan Taylor in that role. Moss was really interesting, actually, that they kind of used him in that role because he was a really good pass blocker. So he added that upside there, even if he wasn't a great pass catcher. But I think with Goodson and Hull, you got two guys who are good pass catchers. And again, I already know the comments are going to be coming and saying that Goodson's drop last year shows that he's not a good pass catcher. But, he is billed as a pass catching running back. That's what they had him on the team for last year. And Evan Hull, that was his specialty in college. That was what he was. He was a good runner, but it was the catching that really sold him to the Colts and other teams. So those guys are going to compete for that pass catching role. You could get a lot of work on mesh concepts, on little routes over the middle, some screen plays. I think Steichen did some really innovative stuff with the running backs in the passing game. I wish he would have done a little bit more, but overall, I think he showed the ability to scheme those guys open. So I think this is a good competition, open competition. It's not the greatest group, obviously, to back up Jonathan Taylor, and if something does happen to Taylor, then you're not looking at the best group of guys behind him, but I do think these are capable guys of filling roles behind him and doing some good things. So as long as Taylor is able to stay healthy and be that bell cow this year, this is a fine group to work with behind him. It's not a group that can carry the load if he goes down, though. I think that's the biggest thing here, and why we might see the Colts look outside at free agency and other avenues to, add more weapons to this room. But for now, on paper, this is a fine backup running back group behind your starting bell cow running back.
That's exactly how I see it. Assuming Taylor's health, they do everything a group of running backs should be able to do. However, it loses a lot of shine if Taylor goes down. Right. I mean, that Sermon Goodson combo was fine for like the Pittsburgh game, but like you cannot expect anything really remotely close to that every week if Taylor were to go down. And as far as roles go, I think you're right. Sermon being the between the tackles, just normal early down runner makes a lot of sense behind Taylor, with Goodson and Hull competing for that, not change of pace, but the receiving down area. Hull maybe has a little bit of a leg up as a runner. Had a 1,000-yard season, had another 900-plus yard season as a runner. Never worse than 4.1 yards per carry in college, and then, of course, 55 receptions as a senior. So he's probably a little more well-balanced. I was getting bullish on him as a pass protector, too, before he got hurt.
Yes.
So we'll see how that goes, because that, honestly, will probably be the biggest deciding factor, other than special teams, is how do you do in pass protection. So that'll be a decent little battle to watch during the preseason, but who knows? In a minute, we'll see if there are a couple guys who might be able to unseat them.
But first, it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You guys are more familiar with the winner take all this time of year than most fans because the Indiana Pacers have advanced to the Eastern Conference Finals. We didn't think they were going to get this far this year, guys, but we're loving every single minute of it. So make sure you are putting down all of your money on the spreads, money lines, player props, and more for Pacers, Celtics, Eastern Conference Finals. It's going to be a blast to see. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. All right, Jake. So we're talking the two running backs at the bottom of the roster now, and I am so much in love with the archetypes of these two players. I have no clue if either of them will ever see an NFL snap in their careers, but I just love the idea of having players like these two guys that I just get really excited when I think about seeing them in camp and seeing them in the preseason. So first up, we got Zavier Scott, who was an undrafted free agent last year. Came into camp. I think he was a little banged up at times, so he didn't do a ton in camp. And the Colts really didn't give that many reps to their lower end players last year because they were trying to get their starters into the new system. So we didn't really see much of Scott, but Scott in college, I believe, is University of Maine. I want to say Maine, not Rhode Island.
He transferred at some point, but I think Maine was his last stop.
Yeah, so University of Maine, Scott was a wide receiver and running back, transition between the two things. And I'm really happy when the Colts moved him to running back because he looked a lot smoother and quicker there at running back than he did at wide receiver. But he has that wide receiver background, can play a little bit wide receiver, can do some return stuff as well and some stuff on special teams. Just a really cool jack of all trades type player. And then Trent Pennix from NC State, a player who came into college as a running back. I believe he was like a 210, 215 pound running back coming into college. They moved him to tight end late in his career, and he kind of served as more of that hybrid sniffer type tight end running back player. Like did a lot of things out of the backfield, but also in line as well. Big time special teams player for them at NC State. So he comes into the NFL out of the NFL draft as a 6 foot, 234-pound fullback / running back, whatever the heck the Colts have planned for him, with really, really good athleticism, had some big plays last year in NC State too. So two players at the bottom of the roster who have experience doing 100 different things at the college level that the Colts are saying, you know what, we're betting on just the athletic traits and these guys just getting better at one position and seeing what these guys can do. So again, I don't know if either of these guys make the roster this year, but having one guy who is a wide receiver and running back in college, another guy who has fullback flexibility / tight end flexibility / running back flexibility, I think that's a really fun running back group at the very bottom of your roster to have.
I really hope Pennix sticks around long enough to make it to the preseason because I so badly want to see him as like the lead blocker for the kick returner, like him in front of Gould on these new kick returns. I want to see it. I don't want us to be robbed of it. But I am interested to see how they use him. Like, is it Mo Alley Cox-ish of the third team? Like, how do they do it? Because traditionally, I mean, the Colts included, but the NFL just doesn't use traditional fullbacks much anymore. They use a tight end for it. So I'm pretty interested. Very little college production statistically, so I don't think it's going to turn some leaf to where he's going to be carrying the ball a bunch or catching a bunch of passes. I think he's going to be kind of a hard-nosed utility type of player. Very interested in both. Scott is a guy who we both kind of had an eye on. I think you spoke with him as well last year. He is definitely interesting, did a lot of stuff collegiately, wore a lot of different hats. I wasn't blown away by him as a running back last year, but he was always the last guy. He didn't get a ton of touches, like you mentioned, even in practice. I definitely want to see him more involved as a pass catcher, even just in practice though, because like that's obviously his background. He's kind of a bigger Evan Hull type when it comes to offensively what you can do with him. So it is definitely a couple interesting guys. Now, if you're talking either of them being able to crack the roster, I would say Pennix probably has the edge. I don't think either of them make it. Both of them are more likely to be practice squad guys, but I think Pennix, if you had to pick between the two, probably has a little more of the edge because he's a little more unique, and you could probably his skill set is more easily utilized for the Colts on game days.
Yeah. Yeah. Zavier Scott has to go through Tyler Goodson and Evan Hull to make the roster. So that's very tough to go through those two guys, especially Hull, who was in the same draft class as him, and the Colts took him higher and obviously invested a little bit more in him. Where Pennix, depending on what they have envisioned for him, because I have no clue if they have him envisioned to be a fullback or like a legit running back or what, or be like some kind of hybrid player. Because if they have him to be like a legit running back, then it's just Trey Sermon in front of him, because he fits the Trey Sermon like mold, like the size and the speed and the physicality. If they have him envisioned to be a fullback, great. There's nobody in front of him. He's the only fullback on the roster. Maybe a Kylan Granson is technically in front of you there, but you got to see what you have right there. And then if you have him at like a tight end hybrid type player, again, he's kind of the only player on the roster besides maybe Granson who does those things. So Pennix, I think, has the better route to making the roster, especially like what you said with the new kickoff rules. You have no clue how that's going to factor into the bottom of the roster. When it comes down to the final 5 or 6 guys that you're keeping on your roster, are you prioritizing linebackers or fullback type players over the 4.2 speed cornerbacks that are 180 pounds who really can't win in that mosh pit that is now the new kickoff rules? Do you value guys like Pennix a little bit higher who can play in between the tackles, so to speak, on those type of plays? So I think Pennix has a better shot here. I'm really interested. I'm just so interested in what they do with him, because I've kind of compared Shane Steichen's offense in the NFL to like a Big 12 offense. It's very Big 12 in how it operates. It's very Chip Kelly and Lincoln Riley in a lot of ways. It's a lot of QB running. It's a lot of just manipulating space with good, like, interesting athletes, and just having those athletes at every position that pulls players away from your intended place that you want to go. Having a guy like Pennix, though, he's so collegey. Like, he's such a collegey archetype of player. Like, he is a college playing like sniffer back or H-back type player. Or if you want to go into like real triple option type stuff, like an Air Force fullback type player, like he kind of is those type of players to me. So I'm really curious to see if they they signed him quickly. Like, if they have an idea of, these certain packages, we want to have a player like Pennix on the field. And again, that might be Kylan Granson this next year when it comes down to real NFL games. But I'm curious if they have an idea for Pennix, because that's such a unique looking player on film and such a unique looking player just on paper that I'm really curious to see what they have planned for him.
And as everyone is wondering, 9.5 RAS for him.
Yeah.
Now that's from the fullback position. Like, for the running back position, it probably goes down a peg. But when you're being moved around and you're being asked to block and everything, like, the dude is a really good athlete for the position. So, yeah, I'm interested to see this group. I'm expecting a lot of Jonathan Taylor. And then if he ever, gets banged up, that's when we'll see the rest. But I mean, it might even be like in 2021 with how much he dominated the backfield. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see for sure. You guys let us know in the comment section, though, of this video if the Colts should sign another running back, or if you guys are cool with running it out there with Trey Sermon, Evan Hull, Tyler Goodson, Zavier Scott, and Trent Pennix. Trent Pennix obviously being our favorite here on the show, as you guys can tell. And if you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll be back here tomorrow afternoon talking wide receivers.